Well, after the Iraqi Army declared victory this week in the battle for Mosul in Iraq, the fight appears to have moved underground. Iraqi and coalition helicopters can be seen hovering over the city, looking for pockets of resistance. We're told surviving Islamic State militants, both men and women, are now wearing suicide vests, fighting from basements and tunnels under the decimated sliver of land they still control. VOA's Heather Murdock was at the scene and filed this report.
Behind me is the Tigris River, and over to the right is the last remaining area where Islamic State militants are still fighting. Helicopters fly low over other parts of Mosul, no longer under threat from IS fire from the ground. But despite a resounding declaration of victory early this week, militants continue to fight from under the rubble they occupy, no more than about 120 meters wide. Soldiers say most surviving militants are foreign, and men, women, and children are wearing suicide vests. The battle is also slowed by close quarters after Iraqi soldiers were injured in airstrikes against nearby IS targets. It is not known if IS still holds civilian prisoners, but at least one Yazidi woman and 2 small girls were rescued Thursday after being held as slaves. People who make it to the Iraqi side alive, including captured militants and fleeing families of IS fighters, are starving and injured, and no one knows how many dead lie under this wasted neighborhood. Reporting from Mosul in Iraq, I'm Heather Murdock, VOA News.
And for the latest now on what remains of the once proud city of Mosul, we are joined on Skype from Erbil in northern Iraq by VOA Middle East correspondent Heather Murdock, who filed that report from Mosul, and right here in Washington by VOA National Security correspondent Jeff Seldin. I thank you both for joining us. Heather, my first question is going to go to you. We've heard of a lot of tunnels under the city. Is that where the remaining militants are holed up? Do Iraqi forces know exactly where they are?
The militants that are still fighting actively are underneath buildings that have been just destroyed. So they are in basements and tunnels that they have built. They say there are a lot of small spaces for tunnels are difficult to fight, and the basements themselves are difficult to fight in because they're very large. However, there's also militants known as sleeper cell militants that are believed to be around all throughout Mosul, and they do not know where those people are.
Jeff, do we have any idea whatsoever of how many fighters are left in the resistance?
It's hard for Pentagon officials and other U.S. intelligence officials to put a good number on it. The number we hear most often right now is that there are about maybe 200 to 300, they think, ISIS fighters still inside the city of Mosul. And then they say, in terms of Iraq overall, they say a couple of thousand, they think, although analysts will suggest higher numbers. It's hard to get a grip on it, especially because, as Heather was pointing out, there are sleeper cells. And this is something that we've heard consistently from Iraqi officials and U.S. officials, that every time Islamic State abandons a city or loses a city, that they leave sleeper cells behind. And what they're really concerned about is not just the veteran fighters who are likely to be captured or fight to the death, but some of the younger teenagers who were perhaps 10 and 11 when ISIS took over those places and now have been brainwashed, are fully buying into the ideology, but are there, they're experienced and willing to bide their time to cause havoc.
Given the numbers that we're talking about here, did Iraqi forces declare victory prematurely?
If you listen to the Iraqi officials or if you listen to the U.S. officials, they would say no. They took the city of Mosul, but that's different than controlling and back clearing the entire city. And that's what they're doing right now. And initially, the Operation Inherent Resolve, the coalition, said it was going to take at least weeks to clear the city just of the mines and the IEDs. Iraqi officials at the Pentagon earlier this week were saying everything, and they meant everything, was booby-trapped. And so it's going to take a while.
And Heather, I've seen some of the video that you've been sending us. Western Mosul is a scene of utter destruction right now. Does anyone actually still live in some of the areas that we've seen in your video?
In recent videos over the past few weeks in Old Mosul, we met one person that lives there, a man in his late 90s who can't walk. And the Iraqi Army is taking care of him. Before the Iraqi Army took care of him, ISIS militants actually took care of him. Other than that, no. And the thing you don't see in the video is the amount of bodies. Every building, almost every building I've been into, which isn't that many because, as he was saying, that the there's mines all over the place. You can't just walk into a building. Has a dead body in it, and the smell of bodies is everywhere. So I don't think anyone's going to move in there, back in there. It's going to be a long, long time, not just rebuilding the city.
And just looking at all that destruction, you know, Western Mosul, or I should say the city of Mosul, used to be a city of 1.5 million people. You say in your reports that about 900,000 were displaced. Where did they all go? And will most of them come back? What are your thoughts on that?
There are refugee camps surrounding Mosul in the desert. People will not stay in those refugee camps indefinitely unless they have no choice, because they're very, very difficult living conditions. A lot of people, anyone who can, has moved in with friends or relatives. A lot of people, especially Christians and Shia Muslims, have told me that they have no plans to go back. They don't believe that they will ever be safe in the place that they were forced to leave a couple of years ago. But other people are really trying hard to get home.
I imagine that. Jeff, what does a loss in Mosul mean for Islamic State?
Look, it was a significant victory for Iraqi forces and for the coalition, but the U.S. commanders who have been advising the Iraqis and the Iraqis themselves will tell you this is by no means over. Islamic State, while they have lost one of their Iraqi capital and they're about to lose their Syrian capital, they still control parts of Syria. They still control parts, small pockets of Iraq. There are areas in Iraq, especially in Anbar province, where they do still have freedom of movement. So the campaign to eradicate Islamic State from Iraq, Iraqi officials say, is going to continue, and they have to keep the pressure up. There's also concerns because conventional wisdom was that if you could collapse the caliphate in Iraq and Syria, that would essentially crush Islamic State, because so much of its ideology was based on the idea of creating the caliphate. That hasn't proven to be true, and so there are remaining concerns for coalition members, especially in Europe and especially in East Asia, in places like the Philippines and Indonesia.
Can still function
Islamic
even
State,
without a caliphate.
They can still they functioned without a caliphate before. You know, remember their predecessor, Al Qaeda in Iraq. They were very good at being an insurgent group. They're good at those tactics. The Iraqi and U.S. militaries were somewhat surprised about how much they fought in these battles, like a conventional military. They're good at fighting the other way, and their ideology, their brand, hasn't been that much diminished despite the losses.
Heather, I'm running out of time, but in the 15 seconds, what is next for the city of Mosul and its residents? What happens next there?
Next thing is rebuilding. And in East Mosul, they're already starting, and the military has said that their first thing that they want to do after they secure all the areas is rebuild the city physically.
All right. Thank you so much, Heather Murdock. Stay safe. And Jeff Seldin, thank you very much. We're going to take a short break right now, but when we come back, the Washington controversy that won't go away. And yes, it involves Moscow and the White House. That's next.